Well, in this episode, you're going to find out exactly why you are growing up in a Canadian family. It would be easy to tell my big story as another typical Ketch Committee boy faces life's challenges and, in line with the family heritage and family temperament, comes up with typical Ketch Committee solutions. Well, I'm proud that passion, risk-taking, and standing up for justice is part of the story, but this is not exclusively my story.
It is our story. And it started with me.
I already talked to you about the horrors of Stalinism. In the 70s and 80s, the Hungarian communist regime didn't even need to bother with harsh methods of control. They were nicely established. They were masters of deception, and their propaganda was refined and very effective. The shackles were invisible in the happiest barrack of the Eastern Bloc. Our relative freedom could only exist because the people knew how far they were allowed to go, and basically they obediently policed themselves. In the 80s, the Hungarian communists toyed with pretend democracy. People could go and express their opinion at these staged public forums. This whole charade was basically done to vent steam in a controlled manner, and it typically showcased these young reformer comrades. But behind the scenes, the old oppressive machinery was intact and ready to neutralize threats. Those people who got carried away by this freedom of speech thing and came out into the open could be picked off one by one. This is exactly what happened to me. I naively walked into the communists' trap. Piarista monks operated a high school in Kecskemét. Its existence was tolerated due to a deal between the Catholic Church and the communist state. The quality of education was very high because of the dedication of the teacher monks. It was an elite school with 300 years of history and traditions, and it had a fantastic reputation. However, the school was under constant surveillance, and several of the monks were trapped and forced to be police informants. The walls had ears. As a Piarista graduate, I had to navigate socialist waters. At the Teachers College, I got a minder. The minder was a fellow student, but also a Communist Party member whose job was to keep an eye on me and report on me. After I came back from Canada, I toured with a Travelogue-style slideshow, and my presentation was sabotaged at the Teachers College by this minder and his sidekick. My posters were torn down from billboards, and they heckled me throughout the evening. The same slideshow had a completely different effect in the Piarista High School. The principal was so impressed that he hired me on the spot. He offered me a part-time position as a teacher of history of art. Of course, I accepted. It was a huge honor. A couple of years before, I was just a student there, and now I could be on the same staff with these living legends, my former teachers. It was a very happy day in my life.
I started to teach grade 2 at an elementary school. I have encountered harassment from the school administration right from the beginning. On the first day I arrived at the school, the principal forced me to take off that little silver cross I had around my neck that I got from my parents. I was surrounded with hostile people. I could not trust anybody. Eventually, I have developed constant fever due to the stress. I was in a crisis. The principal was the wife of the communist chief of the city, the despotic Comrade Terbe. They knew about Papa's job at the Piarista High School, but because he was working with Tati at the Cooperage, they could not pressure him. I was the easy target. Eventually, the psychological torture got unbearable. I had to quit.
A couple of days later, I was invited to one of these pretend forums. The young doctors, engineers, teachers who just started their careers in the city were expected to attend. When I stepped to the microphone, I told the people what happened to my wife, and I laid the blame on the old guard communist leadership. The host of the event, young reform communist Comrade Fekete, didn't even blink. He just elegantly scored a PR victory. He praised my attitude and my courage in front of the people, and he promised that he would look into the matter. Situation diffused, and the public reassured that the system works. Of course, the next day in Comrade Fekete's office, I was told in no uncertain terms that I crossed the line and I could be charged with attempting to subvert the people's state. As he put it, we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, which meant that perhaps constructive criticism of little things here and there would be okay, but to go straight against communist rule was not acceptable. Crushed and humiliated, I went straight to the Piarista High School office, where the new school principal fired me with a flimsy lie. He already got the phone call from his police minder. I became a dangerous liability, and he had to protect his school. I get that. But I went straight to the rector's office. The rector was the leader of the monastery, Father Tuba, who was our father confessor and spiritual leader. He already knew what happened to me, and he offered no sympathy. He coldly distanced himself from us, and he treated me as an irritant. I felt used and then thrown away. At that time, I didn't know that he was one of the main police informants. I was depressed for 3 weeks. Slowly, the consequences of my public outburst started to sink in, and conversations with our friends confirmed that we were screwed.
One morning, the doorbell rang. It was a principal who was desperately looking for a qualified music teacher. He wanted to hire me. But by the next day, he backtracked in panic. He found out that I was one of Mrs. Terbe's casualties. He said, "If I hired you, my head would roll. And I am a year away from retirement." So, I ended up working in a bookstore with some unfriendly people.
No hope for a teaching position ever. Doctorate? That was down the drain. So I settled down to make barrels for life. At the end of the summer, my army call-up card came. I had to join the army for another half a year, but at the barracks I was separated from the others. The commander and his political officers were waiting for me. They were sitting behind a table covered with an oversized red flag, and the captain pulled out an envelope from my file. It was a letter from the counterintelligence officer. So they told me that they knew everything about my controversial past, and if I tried anything subversive in the army, I would be court-martialed. So I became a compliant model soldier. But inside I was hurting. It already felt that I was in jail, and I wanted to be free. We were blacklisted, and the order was given to kinyir the Kecskemét. Now I translate this word as silence the Kecskemét, but kinyir was the old code word for liquidate or eliminate somebody without a trace. If I wanted to have a semblance of life, I would have to rape my own thinking and force myself to live in a lie. That was not acceptable. And unfortunately, troubling news came from the Soviet Union. The old guard were flexing their muscles, and a military coup that would depose the reformed communists became a real threat. Now, the consequences of that in the Eastern Bloc would be catastrophic. Blacklisted people like us, people who were just merely kept in check by local functionaries, would find themselves in boxcars on their way to Siberia. So, at that point, I started to plan our escape to the West.
I was paralyzed with fear. I knew there was no stopping him. I cried every day. We have deceived even our closest friends that we were settling down. Little did we know that the police already knew about our plans.
After the army, I immediately applied for a passport and a visa to the West, and according to the rules, I was not supposed to get that for 2 years, but I got mine immediately, and Mama got hers too.
And then I got pregnant with Myra. We used that to create the impression that we were nesting. We kept everybody in the dark about our trip to Vienna.
I left written instructions for my parents what to do when one day we are gone, what to burn, what to hide, what's going to be the code word on the postcard that we're sending from Vienna that we are safe, what to tell police when they come and ask pointed questions. We packed a leather pouch and a plastic shopping bag with minimal stuff like toothbrushes, socks, underwear, and 2 sweaters to make it look real that we are indeed going on a 2-day shopping trip.
And on the bus, we tried to blend in. And because I was visibly pregnant, we told everybody that we were buying baby things. But inside, we were in agony.
What if it was just a cruel joke and we're red flagged and they're going to detain us at the border? They're going to take us off the bus. But we weren't red flagged. We were written off. Nobody took us off the bus. As troublemakers, we were allowed to slip away. The year-long nightmare was over. The bus stopped at the South train station in Vienna. The door opened and we set foot on free land. We walked to a phone booth and looked up the Australian embassy, and it was within walking distance. The Australians told us absolutely everything we needed to know, so the next morning we abandoned our tour group and took the train to the Traiskirchen refugee camp. We claimed refugee status and we were detained in a quarantine facility for a week. After that week, the families and some lucky single guys were transferred to empty off-season bed and breakfasts, so that's how we ended up in Kirchberg in Lower Austria. Kirchberg in the Pilach Valley is a picturesque, enchanting little village, and it had an active and vibrant church community led by the legendary Father Gussel. Now, Gussel immediately organized help for us, and we met new friends, the Sunks. The Austrian refugee aid organizations did a fantastic job to help us as well. 2 months later, at our Australian immigration interview, they suggested that our immigration would be much easier if my uncle in Canada signed a sponsorship document. And of course, Uncle Frank reached out to us, and 2 months later at our Canadian immigration interview, everything was straightforward. We were accepted.
But by then, I was 8 months pregnant. That's why Myra was born in Eisenstadt. The Sunks organized a fantastic baptism and celebration in Kirchberg. We still had to wait 3 more months to be able to board a plane with a baby. Finally, we landed in Canada on the 22nd of July, 1986.
I hit the ground running. 3 days after our landing, I had my driver's license, and I got my first job as a cabinet maker. Soon we were able to move out from Uncle Frank's and had our own rented apartment. Canada was an ideal place for a hardworking immigrant. Lots of overtime, constantly moving up and up.
And then Martha was born in the Kitchener-Waterloo Hospital.
I found out exactly what I needed to do if I wanted to teach again. Well, a lot of university courses. I jumped into it, and just as I was laid off from my last cabinet making job, I got hired as a teacher. The first few years in teaching were very hard. I needed to learn a lot, make a lot of adjustments, and sometimes I learned the hard way. Due to political turbulence in Ontario, my teacher's salary was frozen at a low level for more than 6 years.
I had a slow start in Canadian life. After Martha was born, I was sick for years. I could not work. But gradually, I started at low-end jobs and moved up slowly. On Saturdays, I taught at the Hungarian school.
Eventually, I got a more decent teacher salary, so we could move into our first townhouse, and we could afford a sailing dinghy. I started racing with the dinghy, and Myra was my crew, but soon I realized that Myra was good. Myra was ready for her own boat. I got her a little bite, and she took off and started to earn a name for herself. And in the meantime, Martha was the star and darling of the Hungarian school. Things were pretty good.
We could pile up the funny, scary, juicy, sometimes dramatic anecdotes. But Papa and I both agree that our rich material is more suitable for a book. We would like to stop at a point in our story when Marta and Myra are no longer little girls and they can continue the story from their perspective.
And we're pretty sure they're going to do a good job.